we're now going to talk about a pretty critical issue, which is the measures that are before us in terms of a series of proposals, which are then to be taken for discussion with the public if agreed. So if Bob, you could introduce this item and at the same time perhaps pick up a couple of points that Robin Pellew and Barbara Taylor made.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I shall keep this as brief as I can, and if I'm not going into detail, if there are questions that you want to ask me, I'm more than happy to take those questions, but I shall skirt over some detail as we go through. The background, obviously, to this is the call for evidence exercise and report that you received in January, which gathered a great deal of evidence and information and suggestions from the public. And as I said a few moments ago, the absolutely clear message from that was that a need for action, a need to address congestion, a need to get public transport working, a need to have better cycle facilities, etc. So that's the sort of almost unanimous view of the respondents to the call for evidence. I think that's a very positive thing. As I say, we perhaps argue about the detail of how that's done, but the push for something to be done is very, very strong. We've then, working with our consultants, done a huge amount of work to analyse, filter, consider all the different things put forward, as well as the long list we've had already developed with our consultants of potential measures that could be taken. And I will cut through all of that process to the fact that we then arrived at a congestion reduction package that is set out in bullet point form at recommendation 3B. I think most people would take the first three of those items as absolutely yes, why not? I hope they would. So if I'll move straight on to peak congestion control points and why we have developed that option. And essentially, almost from the start in looking at congestion, this goes back to work we've done in 2007-2008, there have always been two things on the table. Do you go with congestion charging, or do you go with some form of other restriction on access and control? Essentially what you are doing is deciding who it is you're not going to allow to drive their cars down certain streets. That's what it comes down to. Because that's the ultimate. We can talk about road space reallocation and demand management. It means saying to some people, you're not going to drive down these streets on particular roads. You're not going to drive down particular streets or particular roads.
Could you speak up very slow? We can hear every word of the chairman, and we can hear almost none of his mention.
He's not pointing the right way.
He might not be, but he can speak slower.
I shall move the microphone. Well, it sounds louder to me anyway. I'll move the microphone. So I'm
sorry about that. We'll improve it. Okay.
Also conscious that there's a lot to be got through, so hence I'm perhaps speaking quite faster than I should. I will try and slow down and remind myself to do that. The reason we have the two essential options in front of us that manage congestion, core of both of those is actually, as I was saying, that we have to say to some people, you're not going to be able to drive on certain streets at certain times. That's the only way we're going to get the congestion down. That's the nub of the issue, and how we actually go about that process and how we do that is the nub of the issue. We have recommended as officers going down the road of the peak congestion control points, coupled with the workplace parking limit, which I will touch on a bit later. Why have we gone down that option? Well, in analysing what's been done elsewhere, what's been successful elsewhere, and what the problems are in Cambridge, we've concluded that this is the better of the two options. I'm not saying congestion charging wouldn't work, we just think this is better. I think it's more equitable, and we think it can be delivered much more quickly, and those are key points. When you look at congestion charging in London, they've had to continually increase the charge. Congestion levels remain pretty much as they have been. Okay, they've reallocated road space to buses and cycling, but they've still got congestion, and that was in a situation where they already had good public transport, and already had the majority of people coming into that area by means other than the car. When we look at the situation in Cambridge, the majority of people commuting in from outside are doing so by car. Yes, in Cambridge, travel to work levels by car are quite low, but coming in from outside, they're quite high. And without having a really good, strong, robust in place before it happens, public transport offer, that's going to be very difficult to introduce congestion charging. And if you actually say, well, what does it take to make that public transport really good? You look at where public transport goes wrong. And it goes wrong because it gets stuck in certain streets in Cambridge. Hills Road in particular. And we've put the data in front of the board in the past about delays to buses in Hills Road. At the most extreme, it can take kind of bus an hour to get from the station to the city centre. Okay, that's the most extreme. It's not always like that. But that is consistently the worst road for buses in Cambridge. So actually you need to crack that problem if you're going to get buses running. You've got to get public transport reliable. So the approach we've taken is actually to say, let's put these congestion control points at key points in the network. Some of those are on the Hills Road, and you can't just hit one street because everyone would just drive round. You therefore have to hit a range of other streets as well. So we've expanded that Hills Road, Mill Road, Coldham's Lane and East Road to effectively not get a huge displacement effect, but actually get that mode shift that we talked about earlier, people shifting from car to other modes. And we've also looked at shutting key points on the Ring Road, again East Road, Queen's Road, Grange Road. Now the analysis we've done suggests that that would free up these key routes for buses to move and for more space to be given to cycling and pedestrians. Also, it's something that's relatively quick and simple to do. We can do it under experimental traffic regulation order with equipment that we've already got contracts in place for ANPR cameras, enforcement, etc. We can do that quite quickly. So we think that can be effective and it can be quick. We also think that people who've been most disadvantaged by it, the people who will have to get out of their cars, are most likely those making relatively short journeys within the city. Now, first of all, they're contributing the most to the congestion problem in terms of the proportion of their journey, but also they've got the alternatives in place. They've got city bus services, they've got the ability to cycle and the ability to walk in most. There will be people who don't have that option, but there are, in the main they are. So it has more impact on city people than trips from outside the city. People from outside the city haven't got the public transport. That's why we've gone down this route and why we think this is the best option. Clearly the point has already been made about the need to raise revenue for public transport. We'd absolutely agree with that. We've had very strong commitments from the bus operators. They will respond if we can reduce congestion. They will invest in more vehicles. They will get more drivers. They will increase the frequency. The services will become more efficient anyway if we can get rid of the congestion on those key routes. But they're prepared to top that up. There will still be gaps in the network. Some more rural services around the city, what we call orbital services, perhaps services early in the morning, later in the evening. So a revenue stream to support that would be extremely useful. We've had considerable discussions with Nottingham City Council, which used to work these parking levies, as was said earlier by Councillor Hickford. They have directly targeted that at public transport interventions to support people getting to work. We would be wanting to do the same. So we see the peak congestion control points as being a more deliverable option and an option that is in the round more equitable. Winners and losers are all these options, but in the round more equitable, and that's why we recommended it ahead of congestion charging. It's not to say congestion charging doesn't work, it's just that we think this is more deliverable and fair on those criteria. So I think, Chair, I'll stop there and just then take questions.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Any questions people want to raise or comments people want to make on this? I note that Roger said that I think we note the request from the Assembly and need to follow it up, that we do need to, as part of the documentation, if we agree this, to produce a comparison with congestion charging. It may well be that rather than have perhaps the kind of debate we're having about Europe, that we might actually sit down and agree with the people who propose congestion charging at least some of the facts and figures, so that the two options are also put in a parallel way. So there's that. Any comments people or questions people want to ask? Mark Reed from the Local Enterprise Partnership.
Chair, thank you. Apologies for my standing in today for the previous colleague, but I'm here really as the Enterprise Partnership, which is a business-led private sector organisation. We're supportive of these measures moving forward. This was debated at the Assembly and business colleagues debated it there, and I'd like to rehearse that. Business basically wants to see some action, wants to see something change and move forward. As far as business is concerned, it certainly doesn't see this as the final solution. And moreover, work-based parking levy would need to fully involve business in its consideration and indeed in its spend. And it would also need to do as exactly as you said. It would need to understand that as opposed to an overall congestion charging proposition.
Thank you. Other comments? Francis Berkeley.
Well, can I ask you more about on-street parking controls? My mailbox has been pretty full with people wanting more residence parking. I recognise it's not totally a responsibility of the City or Board because it's the Cambridge Joint Area Committee, but could you just talk for 2 seconds on that? Thank you.
believe the Cambridge Joint Area Committee met yesterday. I've not had a chance to catch up with officers dealing with that because I've been dealing with other matters, but essentially the current situation is that the County Council policy, the County Council is the highway authority, the transport authority responsible for these things. Current policy has evolved over a period of time, and is that we will introduce residence parking schemes where there's a majority of residents in favour. And that can often be quite a challenging situation and quite divisive with communities. The most recent being the Defrebo area in Cambridge, which was done 2-3 years ago, and was quite, let's say, quite challenging for the local community with many pros and many against. It's a lot of issues. So the Cambridge Joint Area Committee is a subcommittee of the Highways and Community Infrastructure Committee at the County Council, but it has on it city councillors as well as county councillors, has decided to review that policy, and I believe the debating discussed that yesterday, but I've not got feedback on the debate. I don't know if any of my colleagues behind me are any more advised than I am. But as I said, current policy is where residents want it, we'll introduce it.
Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I start with, I did attend the Assembly, I did listen to all the debate, which was, in my view, a very constructive and useful debate. My question actually, I think, is to the officers in respect of the peak congestion control points. Perhaps a little bit more detail, please, for myself and the members of the board would be useful at this point. I'm thinking particularly about how they will be introduced, how they will be monitored, about the trials and things of that nature. So a little bit more detail, I think, on that would be useful, please.
Sorry, Bob.
Thank you, Chair. The control points themselves will be very similar to the rising bollard control points for what we call the Cambridge Core Scheme in Cambridge, which was introduced starting in 1997 in a phase where it saw a reduction in traffic. The mode shift we've talked about, we did achieve with those about 15% overall reduction in car traffic in the city centre. They look very similar to those. We are in the process of moving from using rising bollards to using automatic number plate recognition camera for those control points. The rising bollard technology and the detection technology of the rising bollard is now rather old and needs to be replaced anyway, so we're moving towards a camera enforcement. So they would look very similar to the control points for the core scheme, except they'd be controlled by cameras. So there would unfortunately, there does need to be a degree of signing and a degree of visual intrusion with those signs. There would also need to be good advanced signing for those who are operating with variable message type signs that would change when the restrictions are in place. In terms of the introduction, the process we are suggesting that this really lends itself to an experimental process. We're suggesting that for two reasons. One is, it is difficult to accurately predict behavioural change. You can build traffic models and certain assumptions in traffic models about what people will do, and you can go so far, but ultimately this does come down to how much people will be prepared to change mode, change to bike, to walking, to bus. And you can only go so far with that modelling. We could spend the next 10 years modelling it and analysing it and doing stated preference surveys and all the rest of it. But people have done that in the past, something that was any more reliable than the initial modelling. So we say it lends itself to an experiment on that basis, so we can actually do it and see how people do respond. That also allows people to judge for themselves individually and respond as to how well it's worked, rather than trying to second guess how we work and respond accordingly. It also lends itself, and it's relatively simple to implement. Cameras, the signs, etc. Are all stuff we will be doing anyway, or we have the facility to do anyway. Relatively straightforward to implement that. In the back office, again, we already have in place a back office for bus enforcement, for example, which this effectively comes under. These would legally be bus gates. Comes under that same enforcement regime. So the stuff is all there to do that. So we see it lending itself to an experimental process. The way an experimental order process works is the experiment is brought in, it runs for a period of 18 months. Within the first 6 months, people have the opportunity to respond, to comment, to put in formal objection, and you then have the remaining 12 months to make up your mind as to whether to make it permanent or not. If you do nothing, it falls. After 18 months, we have to take it all out again. You have to make a decision within 18 months if you want it to stay. There is scope within that experimental process for making some change and some amendment. The extent you can make that amendment before you set the experiment running again is debatable. But if, for example, we said we're going to have it operating from 7:30 to 9:30, then we decided we'd make it go from 8 till 9:30, that's probably the kind of thing you could do. Change it the other way, make it more onerous, probably more challenging. So again, it lends itself to that experimental process, and it gives you some flexibility for fine-tuning. As I say, I think it's an ideal opportunity for an experiment.
Thank you. Any more? So, anybody else want to express a view on it? So, well, I think I'd like to get a view from South Cambridgeshire on the proposal, because I'm going to give a view.
So I think the view from South Cambridgeshire is that it would agree with the dual concept that we need some form of demand management and that we need some view of revenue raising opportunity to get the buses travelling better. South Cambridgeshire debated this, I think it was in about 2013. There was a resolution on the topic of congestion charging, and the District Council came down not in favour of congestion charging. I think it was roughly 2013. I think the demand management measures that are being proposed by officers make sense. We've debated this to a certain extent in South Cambs, and I think that is the view. As for more buses from the rural centres into the centre of Cambridge, that is absolutely something that South Cambridgeshire wants badly and wants as fast as possible. And I think the revenue-raising measures that the workplace parking levy could potentially bring are exactly what people would want to hear. And for that reason, I would certainly support this. I asked a particular question about on-street parking, largely because I've had a lot of emails in my post bag from city residents who clearly want to favour that as well. I think there are other measures, the Smart City Cambridge measures, I think I'm very interested in as well, and I think we're particularly coming back to them at the next session of Assembly and Board meetings.
Anything?
Well, I was going to add some of my thought processes, Mr. Chairman, really. I think, apologies to members of the public, but I'm looking at page 2310, those that have it, okay? And just to give those that haven't got it, this is talking about future housing and economic growth, which is planned for the Greater Cambridgeshire area. And it goes on to talk about the transport network will get worse, okay, which I think lots of people fully understand, which really leads me, I think, really to the page 25, number 24, which is about the sort of criteria in respect to the call for evidence, which is about value for money, fairness, etc. All of that came to my view that the package that we've got, and it is a package which is laid out in the report of B, is a reasonable package that we find ourselves today. I support this package going forwards. It will not be easy to fully understand the congestion points until the trial goes ahead, and my view for that is that can be looked at a later date when we actually see the results of that. Workplace parking levy, we would have to engage with business about where they see that revenue being spent, and it will be interesting to hear businesses' views on that. I'm also keen on the smart technology, as has already been expressed, okay, and about travel planning, because what we're talking here about is actually change. And change is always difficult to actually put across, particularly to members of the public, particularly members who live in the city or outside of the city. But what we're looking at actually is about changing people's behaviour, and that perhaps they won't drive in, they would perhaps not drive in, but they perhaps would get on better public transport or cycle. So what we're talking about here is that shift, which we have experienced in Cambridge when we did the core scheme, which is also in the report. So I support what is before us today. It was duly voted on at the Assembly, which I listened to and heard the result of that. And I believe, from recollection, that was 8 in favour and 3 against. So therefore I'm heartened by the fact that the Assembly have debated that fully and support this going forward. And I will support this going forward, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything?
Well, I would simply add that I've had the benefit of having seen the very large amount of detailed modelling work that Bob and his team have done on the plan to close certain roads, and a number of different options have been looked at in detail, and the one that is being proposed actually has an amazing effect of balancing the traffic in the most optimal way. Now we have to find out if it works, and we have to get cars off the road to make space for the buses. If we can get the cars off the roads, the buses can get through, and we'll have a better public transport system. So in many ways, a number of these points are linked together. We can't do one and not the other. They're all interrelated. And the one thing we can't predict, which is why an experiment is needed, is how many people will actually give up their car and get on a bus. That is the one question that we can't answer.
Well, to add a further, probably the final contribution, the package that, as others have said, is in paragraph 28 on page 26, does start by having assurance that extra and improved bus services can be put in place. Part of the improvements that I support would be facilitated by the fact that the measures as a package will reduce the number of cars coming in at the peak time and thereby enable the bus operators to operate both a service that people can get on and rely relatively that they will arrive within a quick time and a reliable journey time to their destination. It is the case at the moment that buses get stuck, particularly in one part of the city, for up to an hour, including in the afternoon peak. And as a result, people do not get on buses. Teenagers going to Hills Road or Long Road from Cottenham persuade their parents to drive them in, or even get a car rather than use public transport, because it is not an hour and 50 minutes isn't an adequate time. We accept that there's a comparison going to be made with other routes to achieve this, but we believe that the bus operators will improve the services. We would expect both to use the workplace parking levy in discussions with business to evidence that what we're doing makes a real difference, for some of that money to be invested in improved buses. But I won't name particular things because some of that will come out, I think, in the discussions with the public. We believe and have evidence, as is said, in traffic modelling, which we will be very happy to share and to be challenged, to be looked at, the impact of these measures, subject to what the response is, what combination of hours and different interventions will reduce the number of cars in the centre of city. It's effectively an expansion of the core scheme. It looks at the city and it says it isn't able to cope with traffic, it isn't able to cope with the number of delivery vehicles that come in, particularly at peak times. That there will be a discussion about, well, exactly who goes through the congestion control points. There will be a discussion about technology linking this to the other schemes and smart technology about signalling. So there will be more detail than is in this report shared, and there will be the opportunity to look at the other options, including the fact that there are reports on how the congestion charge would work from previous analysis. So certainly for my point, having looked at this is a measure that takes the pressure off some of the radial roads that come into the city, that the City Deal Board will probably look to put in place an extra package of measures for the time that it's implemented, and we will then be also consulting over a period of perhaps up to 3 years on the workplace parking levy to make sure that is both fair and that business have a big say about how that's implemented. It does raise a chunk of money, and whilst the city deal has got capital funding, it doesn't have revenue funding on an ongoing basis. So on that basis, and on behalf of my council, we will support this going out to get public responses. So, are there any other points? So we've got in front of us on page 21 a series of recommendations, and also picking up the couple of points that Councillor Hickford made on behalf of the Assembly. So we note the call for evidence, and we agree this package that's been put forward. We note the consultation, so I refer members of the public and also members here to Appendix D, which lays out the consultation principles that will be applied. We will be consulting in July, or we'll be discussing this in the public environment and seeking views from the public in July through to October, and that's specified in paras 79 to 84 of the document. And we'll be looking to analyse the responses and bring back a report to this board in January 2017. So on that basis, can I ask, with the other recommendation of the trial implementation in Para D, for the board, all those in favour of that set of recommendations? And any against? Okay, so that's carried, thank you. So we move on, and we come to item, sorry? Well, in the constitution that's set up for the board, Dorcas, there's 3 voting members, strictly, which are the 3 councils. I think that's as much to do with the oversight of the money. But I think the board unanimously supports it going forward for consultation.
That's certainly the case.
For the public discussion in July. Okay.
It's just that I don't have a vote, so I feel a little bit guilty about putting my hand up.
Okay. So I hope that may not be totally clear, but I hope it at least answers the question.